When my sister shoved me out of my wheelchair at her engagement party, right in the middle of the ballroom, under crystal chandeliers and surrounded by people pretending not to stare, it wasn't the pain of hitting the floor that stunned me, nor the humiliation of lying helpless on cold marble while her fiancé gasped and my mother hissed for me not to ruin the atmosphere, but the look on my sister's face, a twisted mix of triumph, annoyance, and something disturbingly close to joy as she spat, "Get up! Stop faking for attention!" The same accusation she'd leveled at me ever since my autoimmune disorder worsened and walking became a luxury I could no longer afford. She had always hated anything that diverted attention from her shiny, curated existence. But tonight, the hatred was sharpened, seething, like she had stored years of resentment for this exact moment. And as the guests shuffled awkwardly, unsure whether to help me or avoid the drama, I felt the humiliation bloom like fire inside my chest. Before I could even sit up, she yanked the wheelchair away, saying loudly, "She can walk if she wants to. This is just her drama." And I saw the way people watched me, not with sympathy, not with concern, but with that awful look reserved for people who might be exaggerating, lying, performing. And in that moment, I realized my sister had succeeded at something she had been quietly attempting for months, turning my illness into a joke. I finally managed to pull myself up with the help of a server who looked more horrified than my own mother. And as he gently lowered me back into the wheelchair, my father whispered angrily into my ear, "Just let it go, please. This is her night." Words I had heard in one form or another my entire life. Words that had repeatedly carved out the understanding that my pain was secondary, my needs negotiable, my existence inconvenient. I wanted to scream, to expose her cruelty, to tell everyone about the months of her accidentally hiding my meds, of her mocking me for being lazy, of her taking pictures of me when I collapsed and showing them to relatives as proof that I was being dramatic again. But all I felt was a strange, icy numbness settling over me, a numbness not of my illness, but of clarity. And I realized I was done being the family scapegoat, the sickly punching bag, the quiet sibling who swallowed everything to keep peace. I stayed silent the rest of the night, not because I was weak, but because I was planning. While she floated around the room accepting compliments on her ring and calling herself the luckiest bride, I watched the dynamic like a detached observer, my mother doting on her, my father trying to calm the whispers, relatives whispering about whether I did it on purpose. And in their reactions, I saw something I had missed all my life. My family never needed me to be wrong. They needed her to be perfect. And perfection demanded a villain. Perfection demanded a struggling sibling whose pain could be rewritten as exaggeration, whose disability could be minimized into an attention-seeking stunt. By the time cake was served, my sister made a dramatic show of wheeling me out because she clearly can't handle crowds, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You always ruin things for me." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel hurt. I felt cold, calculating, and wide awake. That night, as I sat in my room with bruised ribs, throbbing shoulders, and a humiliation that still clung like static, I opened a file on my laptop, one I had been quietly building for months, photos of her sabotage, screenshots of her messages mocking my illness, a video clip from our cousin's graduation party where she tripped me and then laughed when I fell, medical documents showing the severity of my condition, proof of her stealing my handicap placard because parking was hard, and audio recordings where she admitted switching my meds to prove I wasn't that sick. I hadn't intended to use any of it. Back then, I had collected it for my own clarity, to convince myself I wasn't imagining the cruelty. But tonight, with the memory of being shoved in front of 100 people replaying in my head, I knew exactly what I had to do. I waited until nearly dawn before sending one single message to her fiancé, a good man with a soft voice and gentle eyes, a man who had once carried my wheelchair up a flight of stairs when the elevator broke, a man who had no idea who he was marrying. I didn't send everything, just one clip, one screenshot, one piece of evidence strong enough to crack the illusion. His reply came at 6:41 a.m. sharp. "Can we talk? Without her?" And my heart clenched, not out of guilt, but out of relief. We met at a cafe near the river, and I watched his face crumble as he read the messages where she mocked him too, calling him gullible, saying she would train him after marriage, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate him. He asked questions, not angry, not yelling, but deeply, painfully confused. And for the first time, someone looked at me not as the dramatic, sickly sibling, but as a witness, a victim, a human being. By the end of our conversation, he whispered, "Thank you for telling me the truth. I had no idea she was capable of this." And there was a tremble in his voice that hinted at the storm brewing in his chest. I went home exhausted, but strangely lighter, unaware that the real explosion was still ahead. That evening, as I rested in bed, my phone lit up with messages from family, rage-filled, frantic, accusatory, because my sister showed up at my parents' house screaming, claiming I was trying to destroy her life. And in her panic, she exposed more than she intended. She accidentally told our parents about the time she hid my wheelchair keys before my medical appointment, how she replaced my prescribed vitamins with sugar mints, how she recorded me crying during a flare-up because she thought it was funny. And with each slip of her tongue, their silence thickened. By nightfall, my parents called me, not to yell, but to ask quietly, trembling, "Is all of this true?" And I didn't need anger, tears, or theatrics. I simply said, "Yes," and sent them the file. The silence on the other end was heavier than any words they could have spoken. My sister had no idea that her engagement party shove, the moment she thought would humiliate me, was the moment that would unravel everything she had built. But the unraveling hadn't even begun, because her fiancé had asked me one last question before we parted. "Would you be willing to come to her family dinner on Sunday? I need the truth to come from you, in front of everyone." And something inside me, something that had been quiet for years, finally rose to its feet. When I hit the floor after my sister shoved my wheelchair, the room erupted in a half-gasp, half-whispered shock that sliced through the expensive music her fiancé had picked for their engagement party. And as pain shot through my hip and my palms scraped against the marble tiles, I saw everyone freeze. Not because they were worried about me, but because they didn't know which version of the story would benefit them most. My sister stood over me with that familiar sneer she perfected in childhood, the same one she used when she ruined my school project and blamed it on me, and she hissed, "Get up, everyone's watching, stop embarrassing yourself," while her future in-laws exchanged horrified looks, unsure whether they were seeing a red flag or just sister drama. And as I struggled to breathe through the pain radiating up my spine, Mom rushed to my sister's side, not mine, and whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear, "She always does this, don't let her ruin your night." And that sentence sliced deeper than the fall ever could. My sister's fiancé, Daniel, knelt next to me, his face pale, asking if I was okay, reaching instinctively for my elbow. But my sister yanked him away, snapping, "She's fine, she's milking it like always." And something in his expression shifted, something unsure, something suspicious. And for the first time, I saw doubt about her flicker behind his polite smile. 2 caterers helped lift me back into my chair while my sister complained that I was ruining her moment. And I stared at her perfectly curled hair, the sparkling ring she flaunted all evening, the flawless makeup she wore like armor, and wondered how someone so outwardly polished could be so rotted underneath. The rest of the night crawled forward in awkward spurts, guests avoiding me, not out of cruelty, but because they didn't want proximity to the family embarrassment.
and every time I caught Mom's eye, she gave me a silent command to behave, to shrink, to disappear the way I always had. When I finally asked Dad for a ride home because my wheelchair battery was low from the commute, he sighed as if I asked him to donate a kidney, muttering that I should have prepared better and that everyone has sacrificed so much for me already. And the ride home was a quiet, humiliating fog of headlights and unspoken resentment. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the fall in my mind, something snapped, not physically, but emotionally. A break in the long chain of guilt, shame, silence, and obedience that had kept me frozen in this family dynamic. So when I received a call the next morning from Daniel, my sister's fiancé, asking if I was feeling better and if we could talk privately, it felt like the universe nudging something into motion. He confessed that he was disturbed by how she reacted, that he had noticed other red flags about how she spoke about me, and confessed that she had bragged about controlling the narrative at home so nobody would believe me if I ever accused her of mistreating me. He asked gently whether the wheelchair shove was an accident or a pattern. And for once, I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him everything. Not for revenge, but because lies had covered so much truth that the truth itself had become the only act of survival left. Daniel went silent for a long moment before saying he needed time to process, and thanked me genuinely, apologetically, in a way nobody in my family ever had. I thought that was the end of it, until 2 days later, when Mom barged into my house without knocking, her face twisted with anger, shouting that I had tried to sabotage the engagement, claiming Daniel confronted my sister with my made-up accusations. And before I could explain, my sister stormed in behind her, crocodile tears ready, shrieking that I had ruined everything, that I was jealous, that I wanted attention so badly I'd destroy her relationship. And the worst part was that Mom believed her instantly. Dad stood quietly like he always did, and I sat in my chair absorbing their rage like a familiar poison. But something had changed in me after that fall, something steady, clear, and cold, and I told them calmly that I would not apologize, would not retract anything, and would not be their silent scapegoat anymore. They left with curses and slammed doors, but I felt lighter. Strangely empowered. A week passed before the next crack appeared. Daniel's mother called me, apologizing for what happened, saying she found my sister's behavior alarming and that Daniel was rethinking things. And I stayed respectfully quiet, offering no additional commentary because I knew anything I said could be twisted. But apparently, I didn't need to say anything. My sister did that all on her own. She had a meltdown at a brunch with Daniel's parents, accusing them of taking the wheelchair girl's side. And in trying to defend herself, she revealed details she should not have known unless she had been listening outside my call with Daniel, because she had. She had recorded several of my previous conversations as well, twisting them to make me sound manipulative. And Daniel's mother, horrified, informed him immediately. And that was it. The engagement ruptured, not loudly, but quietly, with Daniel telling her he could not marry someone who treated a disabled family member with such cruelty and then lied to justify it. My sister collapsed dramatically on social media, painting herself as the victim of a jealous sibling who couldn't handle her happiness, while my parents blasted me through the extended family group chats, calling me ungrateful, vindictive, unstable, all because the truth had finally outweighed the weight of their lies. But here is where fate, or maybe justice, stepped in again. My primary doctor, the one who had treated me for years, saw the viral posts and reached out with concern. I explained what had happened, and he was stunned not by the shove itself, but what I had never told him, that my sister repeatedly interfered with my medications, pressured me to act fine, and once hid my mobility aids before an important event because she didn't want to look like she had a crippled sister. He insisted on documenting everything, not to take sides, but to protect me legally and medically, and that medical file, complete, honest, undeniable, would soon become the weapon of truth my family never expected me to wield. Because 3 weeks later, an attorney contacted me to notify me that my godfather, who passed away earlier that year, had named me in his will, and that the reading would be soon. And my sister, mom, and dad were all summoned as well. I didn't know what was coming, not exactly, but I had a feeling it would be the first time in my life where the room, the attention, the narrative, all the things stolen from me would finally turn in my direction. And as the day of the will reading approached, my sister texted me threats disguised as apologies, guilt disguised as sympathy, and a final message the night before: "Don't try anything tomorrow. This family is done with your lies." And reading that message, I didn't feel fear. I felt something like closure, sharpening itself